I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson. Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, James Henderson. And on the show today, Pez Collier gives us crazy amounts of value on developing your own creative style and what it takes to win bartending competitions. We talk about larger issues within the industry, his personal journey and struggles as a hospitality professional. I hope you enjoy. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the show, Pez.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Hey, no worries at all, man. No worries at all. So I'd like to start the show by asking, as you may have already heard, have you got any crazy hospitality stories?
Not ones that I can probably talk about on a radio show.
Everyone says that. Let's go with something you've seen in the bar. Something you've seen. A patron do something weird.
Nothing overly weird. Like I've had like vintage guns pulled out and stuff in nightclubs, which is pretty hectic.
Pulled on you?
Not me personally, but no,
Oh,
pulled out in the nightclub. We had to shut it down. This was in the Met, going back like almost 10 years. Some guy had taken his like grandpa's World War II pistol and brought it into the club.
Oh, man. People do some stupid stuff.
It's ridiculous, and all of a sudden he just pulled it out in the middle of the night, and we had to shut the place down. Cops everywhere. It was all pretty chaotic because we couldn't find him.
Yeah.
After he pulled it out, and then we knew that there was someone with a gun in the venue. At this point, we didn't have any idea what type of gun it was. And yeah, we had to shut the whole place down, lock it down. No one could leave, no one could come in except for the cops. It was all pretty chaotic.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I think that was probably the craziest thing that's happened while I've been behind a bar. But yeah, there was like a vintage pistol.
Whoa.
Yeah, I don't even know if it would have worked or anything, or why the hell you'd bring it into a nightclub in the first place, but
jeez,
that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, man. Thanks for that crazy story.
You're right.
Dude, awesome way to start the episode. You're very well known in the bartending scene. How have you built your personal brand?
I think, obviously, time is a big one as well for me. Like, I've been around for a long time. But I think beyond that, my style of bartending was very much influenced by the culinary world. So I kind of cut my teeth in fine dining restaurants, working with amazing sommeliers and amazing chefs, and guys that were really pushing the boundaries gastronomically.
Yeah.
And I think for Queensland or Australia, I was kind of one of those guys that really started being a little bit more adventurous with those kind of techniques and ingredients, and bridging that kind of gap between the culinary world and the drinks world. And I think on the back of that, I did really well in a fair few competitions over the years, and that obviously is quite important in building your own personal brand.
Yeah. Comps seem to be a great way to build your brand as a bartender.
100%. So comps are really comps are a little bit different now to when I started, but when I was competing, at the end of the day, we were just doing it for free shit. At the end of the day, it was a really good opportunity for us to make a drink, and then catch up with our friends if we all got flown to Melbourne for a final or whatever.
Yeah.
Catch up with them, see what they're doing, hang out with them, and at the end of the day, someone would win.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, I've seen competitions really kind of get a lot more intense and get a lot more competitive, which is great. But I think...
Are people taking it too seriously?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Most of my favourite bartenders in the country, in the world, most of them hardly ever compete. Is a competition a sign that you're a good bartender or you're competent at your job? No, not at all. And I really think that this industry is built, and this might sound a little bit hypocritical for me because I have had a fair bit of success in competitions, but I really feel like in this industry there are two main kind of people. There's workhorses and there's show ponies. And competitions really kind of elevate those show ponies to a level of celebritism or whatever it is, which is actually obviously really, really helpful in building your brand. And it's almost in this day and age a necessity, because you could be the best person at your job, people coming into your bar and getting the best service every night, having a great time. And, you'll slowly build a following that way. But if you get second or third in a national competition, all of a sudden you're in the magazines, your name's here, it's there, it's everywhere. And I find a lot of this industry as well with the competition side of things, it's like a snowball effect, like you'll start off and you'll try for a couple of times, you might not do too well, you might place, you might get a semi-final, you might be this or the other. And all of a sudden, your name starts appearing in these finals quite regularly, and then all of a sudden you get a third or you get a fourth, and then it just kind of snowballs from there. And then it kind of a bit is like a flavour of the month kind of thing, where you have these bartenders that are appearing in every single one because they're pushing themselves, and it also brings validation from the brand perspective as well to have these names in their competitions. Mm-hmm. And so it's really an exposure thing, I think, as well. But yeah,
does that mean brands are wanting certain bartenders to be entering their
100%.
competitions? Yeah,
100%. Like anyone who thinks and this is probably going to get me in a whole bunch of shit, but anyone who thinks competing is about bartending is completely wrong. Mm-hmm. So competing is pretty much a job interview for a brand. They're looking for someone who can represent their brand to the best of their ability. And in their mind, they've probably got people that they're already looking at in terms of their competing, like people that they're wanting in there to add validation to their brand or to their competition or to this, that, or the other. It's less about making drinks and more about how well you can embody their brand. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing about competing is it's not about making good drinks. It's about learning how to compete, mm-hmm. So reading the T's and C's, making sure, and certain people fit certain competitions more so than other people. So, if you look at world class over the last 5 years, they've got a very distinct winner every single time. They've got someone that almost fits their mold, which is at the end of the day, so they should. It's a representation of their brand and of their competition. Whereas, if you do, a tiki competition, then generally the guy that wins that's going to be fun and over the top, and so brands are very precise with who they pick to win their competitions. You could have the best drink and not win, or you could have a drink that you don't think is the best and you could still win. It's very much a job interview for that brand.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned there before, I sort of want to open this up a little bit more. You said that you started with sort of a culinary background. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so my first kind of real serious bartending job, I suppose, was under Ryan Lane, going back a fair few years now, at the Urbane Restaurant Group, which is one of the most well-known kind of fine dining establishments in Brisbane. The restaurant's been there for going on probably 17 years now, and a couple of years ago they redeveloped and added a more casual restaurant and a cocktail bar as well. So while I was working in there, I was under the guidance of Andy and Drew, who were the owners, who have won the Gourmet Traveller maitre d' awards and stuff like that. So service was obviously a big part of what we were doing. But in the kitchen, I got to work with guys like Kim Manchin, with Taddy or Alejandro, who's the chef now, who came from Mugaritz and Noma and a whole bunch of these places. Ben Williamson, who's now head chef at Gerard's, worked with him. Steve Harry and a whole bunch of these other guys that really shapes the way that I think about drinks. And I think this is one of the things where I kind of found my niche in bartending is, for me, it's all about flavour. Like, my composition and the way I think about drinks has very little to do with booze. Mm-hmm. I work with flavours that work together. Often, like if I'm creating a drink or anything like that, booze is the absolute last thing I worry about. It's the last thing I do. It's the last thing I kind of comprehend. So I will make a cocktail and then find the booze for the cocktail, rather than starting off going, okay, well, I'm using Glenfiddich, I'm going to make a drink around Glenfiddich. So, because for me, it's literally, whether you're working in a fine dining establishment, whether you're flipping burgers at a burger joint, whether you're making Boilermakers at a rock and roll bar, or making amazing high-end cocktails at the Artesian in London, it's all about flavour. That's the bottom line. It's all about flavour. And flavours work whether you put them on a plate or whether you put them in the drink. It's the same thing. And so, certain flavours, will always work, whether it's in liquid form, whether it's in food form, whether it's a mousse with a molecular form, whether it's whatever it is, So for me personally, when it all breaks down, that flavour's the bottom line from which we work everything back towards. And I think that way of thinking was really ingrained in me and entrenched in me from working with these amazing chefs. And one thing that I learned from them in a really, I suppose, early stage in my career was just the importance of simplicity and breaking drinks down and going, okay, well, ingredients aren't only ingredients because what they bring to the drink, but it's also the way that the ingredients influence every other ingredient. And I remember when I was one of the first drinks I made for a competition, I went and gave it to the chef to try, and we ran through what was in it, and it's like, why is that in there? Why is this in there? Why is that in there? What's that doing? And it really made me think. I had done some process. I was doing a smoke or a rapid infusion or something like this. I can't remember exactly. And it's like, what's the point? What's the point of doing that? And that was one of those moments that, for me, that kind of really stuck with me in the way that I bartend and the way that I approach drinks is everything that you do needs to be thought out and precise and for a reason. You see a lot of people that are smoking this, that are changing this, that are adding 17 different types of sugar, 15 different types of bitters, and smoking it and throwing all this other stuff. And it's just one of those things where you've really got to break it down and think, why am I doing this? What's it bringing to the drink? And is there any purpose of it? I don't know. I think I waffled on there a bit.
That's all right, man. Dude, no worries at all. There were a lot of awesome quotes that came out of that I would... I'd love to use online for you, man. Some really good stuff. But you also mentioned there that you love wine. So can you tell us a bit more about that, about even wine pairing and sort of your process there?
Wine's my jam, man. Like, I love that shit. Like, I reckon 85% of what I drink is wine.
Yeah.
And I think potentially that's one of those things where the influence of the culinary aspect and all that kind of stuff kind of comes into play, and also amazing, working with these restaurants that have amazing cellars and amazing sommeliers and learning from them. Wine's just this beautiful living kind of creature which is changing and developing, and every bottle is different, and from different regions, different styles, and all this kind of stuff, and it's ever changing, and it's really something for all occasions for me, which is really amazing. From sparkling through to dessert wine and everything in between has got a time or a moment that you can enjoy it. I think as well a big thing for me is, and this might sound weird from a bartending perspective, but I don't particularly like, and I don't know if this is just because I drink so much wine, but I'm not a huge fan of high-proof alcohols. Even when I am tasting spirits and stuff like that, I'll generally dilute them down to about 20%. Because for me and my personal palate and the way that it works is I get a lot more nuance and flavour out of things at lower alcohol contents. And I think that's why I have an appreciation for wine and things like that, because it kind of sits in that perfect ABV, to really get the most out of it. And so I find I just really fucking enjoy wine. But I think even within that, man, I suppose there's that little bit of consumerism, I suppose, as well, in terms of if you're sitting down at someone's cocktail lounge and you have a cocktail, you obviously appreciate their skill and their knowledge and their preparation and all that kind of thing. And for me, wine's like that as well. A wine is a representation of sight, of great variety, and also the hand of the winemaker as well. So I think there's some really amazing stuff happening in Australian wine at the moment.
What are you seeing in Australian wine? Maybe some innovation that's happening.
Totally. So definitely, there's a big movement through these young guys that are making some amazing stuff. Out of Basket Range and Adelaide Hills, especially, it's really kind of coming to the fore in terms of these pushing that more natural kind of minimal intervention kind of stuff, which is kind of really catching on and drinking really well, and it's got a vibrancy and a life about it, which is really exciting. Guys like Jaume, obviously Unico Zello as well. Really young guys like Brent, those guys from Unico Zello are like 26 years old, and they're pumping out amazing stuff. And they've got an amazing distillery down there as well, which is doing some absolutely incredible stuff. The Applewood Distillery is making some amazing gin and Australian native aperitifs and things like that. And they're just pushing the boundaries. Nothing's off limits to them. And I think as well with this younger generation of winemakers that are coming through, rather than following in the footsteps of the people that have come before, they're kind of going, well, what can we change? How can we kind of go out on our own little adventure? And a lot of them are championing, different alternative grape varieties. Like the guys from Unico are making some beautiful Fianos and amazing varieties that are kind of drought resistant and work really well with certain climates in the Riverland and stuff like that. So
how can people do that? And are you going through that process yourself of deciding whether to go into wine even?
Look, it's something that I've looked at a little bit. Obviously in Brisbane it's a little bit hard. We don't have, it's not like Melbourne where we have the Mornington Peninsula on our doorstep, or Heathcote or the Yarra Valley. So it is something that I have looked at a little bit in terms of potentially studying winemaking and things like that. But it's not something that I think is on the cards just yet. I think there's a bit of time there. I think one thing that I would like to see, a lot more of is cool wine bars in Brisbane. Like in Sydney, you've got Bar Rosé and 10 William Street and 121 BC and all these amazing wine bars. And then in Melbourne, you've got Embla, you've got Bar Liberty, you've got all of these places which are really kind of pushing forward that wine drinking culture. And we're seeing little bits of it come through now, which is great in Brisbane. But I feel like Brisbane even still is still playing it that little bit safer, because at the end of the day, it's they're businesses and you need to make money. But I'd really love to see a kind of explosion of wine bars that are kind of pushing that kind of a little bit more funky, a little bit more weird, a little bit more left of centre stuff. Because
is the wine culture here in Brisbane for that?
Well, that's the question, and there are little venues that are starting to kind of really push that through, which is really great. The guys down at Maker and Gage are doing some really cool stuff. The guys at La Lune, obviously, they've got a great wine list there, and I really love what they're doing. There's a new one opened up down in the valley called Mr. Chester. So it is popping up, and I feel like across the board, the quality of wine lists from fine dining restaurants through to bars has increased over the last couple of years. Which is really cool. It's really cool to see, and I feel that hopefully that next step is just having those cool little wine bars that are kind of focusing on cool, funky little small batch wines. That we can all kind of enjoy. I think there's a certain life and vibrancy about those wines, which I really appreciate.
What are you learning about or exploring now?
Me personally?
Yeah,
I think obviously, as we've spoken about a little bit at length, wine's definitely been something that I've looked a lot at in the last couple of years, doing some certifications and all that kind of stuff. So that's been and it's one of those things that it's just, wine's one of those things where the more you learn, the more you realise that you know absolutely nothing. And so it's just constantly learning and changing and developing, and and that's kind of the nature of the beast there. I think on a bartending front, I'm at a pretty interesting stage now where, for me, it's kind of changed into this, I suppose. I love service, so I won't give up doing service because I love it. I love the interaction. I love the excitement. I love the connection that you have through service. But I feel that from a bartending perspective, potentially I've moved into more of a kind of mentor figure kind of thing. Like I haven't competed for 3 years or so. Like I don't get much enjoyment out of competing anymore. But I get a lot of enjoyment out of helping people compete. Helping them develop their concept and their style and things like that, and offering guidance to people that are coming up and people that have chosen that they want to do that kind of thing. Even if they don't want to compete, I suppose I have kind of been a little bit of moved into more of a kind of mentor role, I suppose. So for me, the bartending thing is a little bit less about the competition circuit or things like that, or proving myself or building my brand specifically as a bartender. And now it's more about kind of giving back to the community and figuring out how I can help other people pave their paths.
So how are you doing that?
Just by obviously just being open for people to come and talk to as well.
Cool.
Like,
is there anything that you're actively working towards to build that, or to share knowledge, or to help the industry grow?
Not specifically. Obviously, I still not at the moment. I'm on holidays, but I still do work full time as well. And I think there's a little bit of a common misconception about mentorship, where potentially if you have that mentor figure, they're not going to spoon feed you. They'll give you the tools that you need to when you need them and to develop. But I think nothing's being spoon fed, and I feel the thing is it's never been easier to be good at bartending. I think Cam Perrett said this in his one as well. Like, we talk about it quite often. It's never been easier. Like when I was going through it, the resources that were available to you were nowhere near what you have now. The resources on the internet, everything's available on the internet. One quick Google search and you've got pages and pages of relevant information for whatever your question you were asking. And I feel like people can sometimes rely too heavily on this mentor kind of thing, and it's like, it's not like an apprenticeship, like I suppose working in the kitchen is, but we are there to kind of help and give guidance, but we also, generally people that are in these kind of mentor positions have full-time jobs that are stressful, and so we don't have time to kind of spoon feed you everything, and so
it's a very time-intensive job as well.
Totally, exactly right, yeah.
And I feel like when hospitality workers chill, they want to chill. Like when they're off, they want to relax. They don't want to be.
Well, they try.
They try. Yeah.
They try.
I find people are either like super energized or like docile. And I'm the docile guy.
The docile guy.
I'm off. When I'm off, I'm off.
That's good, man. It's good to have that switch, because a lot of people don't. Like I burnt myself out. That's why I'm on holidays now. Like it's been a good 4 years or something since I've actually had any time off. So taking a bit of time off now. But yeah, it's important to have that off switch. I suppose finding that balance between, unfortunately in Australia, we don't really have a really strong kind of bartending school culture. Like in Eastern Europe, you've got these amazing schools where they learn and they teach you, and it's almost like a university degree, and you've got guys like Alex Kratner and Simone Caparoli and those kind of guys who you can see have been through that similar kind of school, and the way that they bartend is amazing, and it's fluid and it looks beautiful. We don't really have that here. You can do TAFE things and stuff like that, but from what I haven't done them, but from what I've seen, they're relatively dated and not remarkably relevant to the industry as a whole. It's one of those things that at the moment, so much of hospitality in this country is self-taught. And so I think you've also got to kind of find that balance between the motivation to teach yourself and also relax as well, because relaxing's important.
Is there a positive side to that as well, in that people kind of can come up with their own unique way of bartending, or their unique way of
I think
providing service?
All in all, and as a global thing, I think Australia has one of the most creative bartending scenes, and you see that through global competitions, I feel, as well. Like, Australians have always done well on a global scene, because I think we do have that kind of imagination when it comes to drinks and drink creation, and also in terms of presentation as well, which is obviously a huge part of it. We don't have these hotel bars which have been open for 200 years and have this really structured way of learning and a structured way of doing things, which is a catch-22, you know, like it obviously has positive aspects, but it's probably also missing some aspects as well. But, you know, it's a very young and it's a very developing culture, which is really exciting. Yeah, I think it's just the way it is, you know, like it's neither give, you know, an advantage over the other one. They're just kind of both got their own pros and cons. But it does put the emphasis on the individual person to do their own learning and to develop their own style, because at the end of the day, you know, there's so much room there to do
They're
it.
the only ones that can teach themselves, really. You know, you can lead a horse to water, right? You can't make them drink,
Exactly
so,
right. Exactly right.
Teach them anything.
And I think that's the thing, is where, like, you know, I suppose specific venues have training programs and things like that for their staff, which is really good, and I encourage that as much as possible. And, you know, we do have a lot of trainings and things like that on offer to us, and it's just a matter of actually going to all the trainings, learning all the trainings, but also beyond that, like, that self-learning thing needs to be, like, basic. You know, you need to really kind of take it all the way back to the basics and read some of these resources which break it down into such a basic kind of level, because there's no point going to a whiskey tasting and them talking about all these specifics about still size and shape and, you know, different peat levels and all this kind of stuff if you don't know how whiskey's made.
Yeah.
You know, or if you don't know what peat is, you know, and there's no like shame in that. Like, it's everything's learned. Everything in this industry is learned, and so it's kind of, I think, kind of taking the time to go back to those basics and figure things out before we focus on the specifics. I feel like a lot of people in this day and age are trying to run before they can crawl. Even from the most basic training session or the most basic book or the most basic you know, website material, you will learn something. Regardless of who you are, you will learn something. I'm a big believer in kind of going back to those basics and going back to them often, you know, so always kind of going back and figuring out those basics before you learn, and also going back to them.
You mentioned there earlier, we mentioned a couple of times throughout the episode about, you mentioned that your creative process and sort of creativity, it's come up a couple of times. Like, did you develop that process through bartending, or did you have something else that developed your creativity?
Working in kitchens is probably what did it for me. And also taking a lot of kind of the elements of the way kitchens work. You know, like before I used to write cocktail lists, before I do them, I'd kind of sit down and, you know, watch documentaries about El Bulli and the Avery and Chicago and Alinea and all of these amazing restaurants, because that inspires me, that excites me, and like flavor mapping and all that kind of stuff is a thing that's been used in restaurants for a long time. And but just learning about different people's creative process, I feel, helped shape mine. So obviously guys like Ian and Ryan from the White Lion guys, Ian's a good mate of mine, has been for almost 10 years now. But the way that those guys kind of do things, and the way that it's so collaborative, and the way that they push the boundaries and things like that. You know, Grant Aikert's at Alinea and the Avery in Chicago, which I've mentioned before, the way they do it as well. And I love their openness about it all as well. So, like, you know, they have a YouTube channel which kind of, they just document everything. So, you know, it might be just them sitting down in a room with a video camera talking about a gin and tonic, and just that creative process of how they kind of work with a gin and tonic and how they can elevate a gin and tonic and all that kind of stuff. So I think I've taken a little, like, at the end of the day, it's all like a jigsaw puzzle kind of, man. You just take little bits from here, there and everywhere, and that kind of builds your whole ethos and your whole picture. But also it's general interaction as well. You know, I've got my own creative process and the way I do things, but if I'm involved with someone else in terms of writing a drink or coming up with a list or doing anything like that, then at the end of the day, it is that interaction which also helps me as well. So they're probably they might have a different process to which I do, and that helps me learn as well. So you're constantly learning. And as I said before, even the most basic things, basic interactions, you're always learning something. And I think as people go on in this industry, it always pays and it's helpful to be open to those interactions. Like just because someone may not have been bartending for as long as you, or they may have worked in a different venue or a different style of venue, you can pick up things from everyone. And I think that's really important in kind of creating your own personal, unique
Style,
yeah, totally. Style, or and that's just an exposure thing. And this is one of the big things that I always kind of try and get everyone to think about, is just travel and see the world and see the way that they do things, and see what's happening because it is a truly global industry. So it half of the time, if I'm doing drinks or creating things, I'm looking to New York, I'm looking to Paris, or I'm looking to anywhere in the world where cool shit's happening, man. Like, and just being aware of what's going on in Tokyo and what's going on in Sao Paulo and all these kind of places, because it's all stimulus and it's all influence and it's all motivation, to keep going and to keep creating and to keep pushing that boundaries, So it is something that I do recommend to everyone, to just be constantly traveling. And if you don't have the capabilities of physically traveling, then you've got the internet there, and it's just finding 50 bars around the world which are doing cool stuff and going, okay, cool, what's Himcock in Oslo doing at the moment, or what's on the menu at Blind Pig in London, or Trick Dog in San Fran, like what are these guys doing, and it's a really, the information's all out there, and I think that's one thing that we do is, if you want to achieve and if you want to really push yourself forward, step outside your own city, step outside Australia, and look at what's going on a global scene, because someone may be doing something in Kyoto that no one's ever seen before.
We do have some listeners overseas as well, so that's definitely something to be considering as well. Obviously, a lot of the show so far has been the Australian market, but yeah, it's about drawing on all those creative inspirations from all over the world, from anywhere. They can literally come from anywhere, and I think that's the point you're trying to make.
Exactly. Like, some people look to art and music and this, that, and the other as their inspiration. For me, it's always been a little bit more practical. I've always looked at what's happening in the drinks scene on a global perspective, because it is one of those things, and you might have a technique like rapid infusion or something. I think I was the first person to use rapid infusion in the competition in Australia back in 2010 or something for Bartender of the Year. And that was a technique which people hadn't seen before. And, I picked that up from Dave Arnold, from a podcast from Dave Arnold, who owns Booker and Dax and stuff in New York. And I was like, shit, that sounds fucking cool.
We've mentioned Dave Arnold before, I think. Did he write Liquid Intelligence?
He did, yes. Yeah. So, great book. If you don't have it, definitely go and get it. It's fucking amazing. But some of those techniques, like I literally was closing the bar. I used to put the podcasts on when I was closing the bar. And, he'd have guys, chefs and bartenders just ring in and, ask him questions, and he'd just waffle on, and just a wealth of knowledge. And I heard him talk about it and tried it, and it worked really well. And then, that was something that was really cool and something that hadn't been seen here.
Yeah.
Which, if I wasn't open to that kind of global thing, and if I was just focusing on what was happening at my bar or the bar next to me or the bar down the street, I never would have seen, or I never would have done.
Yeah.
And you see it now, it's actually quite common, little techniques like that, because it is, things are catching on a lot quicker now because of the transfer of information. But also stylistically, and looking at trends, like what's the next big thing going to come through? Is it going to be tiki? Is it, the fact that speakeasies are dead, or is it, and I think that can help you really stay ahead of the curve, which, as we spoke about many times to the interview before, is all about building your own personal vibe and style and career as such. Or if you're a bar owner, being ahead of that curve can be really beneficial for your business.
You mentioned that you get all this knowledge from all kinds of areas. Do you have one resource that you would recommend? One, if there was one
One
resource or something that people could learn from,
Ooh.
what would it be?
Ooh. For me personally, it's always been restaurants, like seeing what people are doing. And so many of my drinks over the years have been recreations of dishes that I may have had in restaurants or looked at online, like the guys from, that obviously closed now, but El Bui, all of those guys were just doing amazing things that just completely changed the way I think about drinking. But in terms of having like one resource, I'm a big like internet person. I do a lot of like resource finding on the internet. Another one that was really helpful for me was Modernist Cuisine by Nathan Myroyd. It's a massive like 6-volume Goliath of a book with probably the most pretty pictures you'll ever see in your life. And that's come down in price. When I got it, it was like $1,200, and I think it's down to like $400 now. Things like that. And
worth every penny.
Right, exactly right.
Yeah.
Then it kind of looks at things and go, well, why do we boil an egg that way?
Yeah.
Or why do we cook a steak that way? And it kind of breaks it down and goes, well, is that the best way to do it? Can we do it a better way? And that's kind of the way that I think about drinks as well, is it's like, well, does this drink work better with, egg white or aquafaba or, soy lecithin? Or like, what's the best way to get the desired thing that we need? And I think that's one of those kind of mentalities that is very much entrenched in places like El Bui and Modernist Cuisine and things like that, where, they'll cook a mushroom 500 times to figure out what's the best mushroom for that dish, And I think that kind of really helps build my psyche when it comes to drink creation and looking at it and going, is this the best thing for this drink? And if it's not, how is it not? What can we change? Or if it is, why is it? Why is it better than this? Or why is it better than that?
Asking why and sort of delving more deeply.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because it's like so many things, you might make a drink and it's go, oh, we'll put egg white in it. It's like, well, why are you putting egg white in it? Do you have a better kind of process for using, texture or things like that? Like, as I said before, is it better to use soy lecithin, or is it better to use aquafaba, or any of these kind of things, and breaking things down and asking yourself why. Like, why do we use that rum, or why do we use that specific citrus, or why are we using, a sugar syrup rather than an agave, or rather than a corn syrup, or a maltose, or a dextrose, or and kind of breaking it down and actually asking ourselves, the components of the drink, are they the absolute best that they can be?
What's your biggest challenge right now, Pez?
My biggest challenge, I suppose it's probably something that I've always kind of battled with, and that's kind of balance in hospitality. Finding that balance between work and social life and party and health and all that kind of stuff. And it's an ongoing battle that I think everyone in this industry kind of feels, but it becomes more and more relevant the older you get, and it's kind of one of those things that you realise, working 60 to 80 hours every week leaves not much time for actually living your life. And so it's something that I've been consciously kind of working on. And it's one of those things, like working in hospitality almost kind of pushes you to the outside of the kind of general social interactions. You can't do certain things, or you miss out on, your partner's 21st birthday, or your mum's birthday, or things like that, because we're just conditioned to work hard all the time, 60 hours a week, and it's relentless. It's like we've almost built this kind of sick culture where you're almost looked down at for asking for a day off, or you're almost kind of laughed at if you only work 40 hours a week, and it's a really unhealthy kind of balance, and it's a really unhealthy kind of nature in the industry. And I feel that more and more people are kind of, stepping outside the industry and finding hobbies, or taking up yoga, or, boxing, or things like that, just to kind of offset the stress of what we do. And it's kind of that thing where, if we were all accountants, we'd get paid, we'd work our 40 hours and we'd go home, or if we worked a little bit extra, we'd get paid overtime and all that kind of stuff, where that's not how it is in hospitality.
No.
It's kind of, and you're kind of conditioned this kind of drudgery to just push through, and it really takes its toll, obviously physically, but mentally as well. It's no wonder that there's such high levels of alcohol and drug abuse and antisocial behaviour, and even like suicide in our industry, because it's a dark place. It's working all through the night when all everyone else is, sleeping or things like that, and you kind of gravitate towards people that work in the industry, which is great because all of my best friends work in the industry and I love them all dearly. But it's a hard thing to maintain those kind of friendships and relationships and family ties and things like that when you're on such a different time schedule. And so I think one of the biggest challenges that I've been facing and continue to face and will continue to face is just finding that balance where, you've got to be looking after your mental health, your physical health, maintaining strong social contacts without kind of jeopardizing your work, and just finding that balance.
How are you doing that?
I think one of the biggest things for me was learning to say no to things. You're so conditioned to just be like, yes, okay, fine, let's do it, let's push through, push on kind of culture that we have here. And it's kind of like, you know what, the venue's not going to burn down if you're not there. You've got other staff members or whatever, like you can actually say no to things and actually kind of just break that cycle of always saying yes. And taking your time off, like it's one of those things that like you really realize, say you work 5 or 6 days a week, you're generally in a bar 7 days a week anyway, whether it's for a product tasting or a training session or just to drink or whatever, you're always in those bars. And so it's one of those things where I've made a conscious effort that if I'm not at work, I'm not at work. So I've disabled all of my work emails and everything from my phone and all that kind of stuff. So I've made a really conscious effort to, when I'm at work, I'm 100% at work. And when I'm not at work, I'm 100% not at work.
Yeah.
Which took like a couple of weeks to get used to because it's ingrained
that's
in
not
you.
long in the grand scheme, really. That was actually pretty fast.
It's probably just because I'm really lazy. But like, it's one of those things where you're so conditioned to always have your phone on you. And if you get an email, you're expected to reply within half an hour, whether it's your day off or not. Like because of mobile phones now, you're 100% contactable 100% of the time. And with that comes this certain level of expectation in terms of, your emails need to be returned within half an hour, your phone calls need to be back in 5 minutes kind of thing, whatever it is. But making that conscious effort and that conscious decision to be like, well, if you want to talk to me, this is when I'm at work, this is when we do business, this is work. And when you step outside of that, spending that time to take your dog for a walk or go to the gym or go boxing or play around a golf or do things that are completely unconnected to the industry. And it's actually one of those things as well where, like, I've actually made a little bit of a decision personally for me as well where, when I was younger, I had to go to every hospo party. I had to go to every training. I had to do this and that. Every single thing that happened, I had to be there. And as I've kind of gotten older, I've realised that it's an unhealthy way to live. You can't do it, because there's so much happening in the industry that if you go to it all, you never have a day off. You're at a training session, you're doing a tasting, all of a sudden there's an expo on and you're working for that, and then someone's sick and you're covering them, and then you're doing a rock star here, and it's just constant. It's just completely constant. I think you've just got to kind of, some people get FOMO or whatever, and like they want to be involved in it all, and that's great. And if you've got the energy to do that while maintaining that balance, that's awesome. But for me personally, now that I'm a bit older, I just don't have that energy anymore. And so I suppose being a little bit more selective with the events that you go to and things like that has actually helped me a lot as well.
How can we fix those more endemic problems that you just brought up there before?
Look, if I knew how to fix them, I'd probably try harder. But it's one of it's just such a tough one.
I think even talking about it is like
a massive
super important.
Super important, and we've lost a few friends over the years through suicide, and at the end of the day, I think respecting what we do, we're playing with drugs every week. Like alcohol's one of the worst, in my opinion. Like, and what it does to people's psyche and the way that they think, and it's especially with the levels that we drink at. It's not normal to drink the way that we drink. It's dangerous to drink the way that we drink, and especially in this culture where things are not champions, but how many times have you been out for a massive night out and then it was a joke? Like the next few days, like, oh, so and so was so wasted, Did you see when they vomited here? Rah, rah, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
Which it's not. Like,
Yeah.
like I think we need to be a little bit more serious with it. And, you know, the fact that hospitality doesn't cut hospitality off is fucking stupid. You know, like, there's times when rather than cutting me off, someone just gives me another shot and I'm wasted, so I'll do it anyway. But, like, that's not helpful. Like, I should have been cut off and told to go the fuck home. Like, and so I feel like until people start respecting alcohol more, it's always going to be an issue.
Is that Australia or is that globally or?
I'd say it's a global issue, like, but especially in Australia, you know, I think we've definitely got an issue with alcohol, and the way that we drink. You know, like we don't have that kind of ingrained drinking culture with places like, you know, Spain and Italy and stuff like that, where they have this aperitif hour and all of this stuff where they're actually, you know, trained to drink low alcohol stuff from a young age, and then there's that appreciation, and, you know, whereas here we just got a straight up binge drinking culture, you know, and it's really difficult, like, and it gets messy and it gets crazy and people get violent, and, you know, with that comes a lot of drugs and all that kind of stuff. So I think as a whole we do have a large issue with the drinking culture in Australia, and I think with bartenders as well, you know, like in a bar, alcohol is so accessible, you know, and when you're constantly around bars, you're constantly around alcohol, and, you know, I think you just got to kind of keep yourself in check and, you know, take a week off, take a month off, take 6 months off, like whatever it is, or just be more conscious of what you're drinking, and, you know, rather than, I suppose that's one thing that I try to do a little bit, is kind of cut out the needless drinking. You know, like for a long time I only drank with food.
Yep.
Which kind of really...
That's a good rule, I think.
Yeah, which really kind of helped because, shit, I'm not going to, you know, deny myself a glass of wine with dinner, or, you know, a beer before dinner or something like that. But it kind of, you know, it just makes sense to me. It just makes sense to me, like, if you're eating to have a drink, and that kind of cuts out that, you know, sinking piss at the bar at 2 a.m, you know?
Well, this is slightly an aside to what you're saying there, but with food, with drinking with food, they're the best experiences I've had drinking.
Exactly right.
Because food and drink together just creates this amazing experience. When you pair things beautifully, it takes things to a whole new level.
Yeah, it makes the drink taste better and the food taste better, and it really highlights. And that's the thing. I think that's one of the big cultural things that I suppose is different to kind of the way that a lot of the Europeans drink, is that there is that kind of connection with the food, and there is that kind of appreciation for that shared experience between the food and the drink, and so little things like that, like I think really make a difference. But I think what it all boils down to really is just a consciousness, making conscious decisions and going, okay, well, shit, I've been hitting it hard for, you know, 3 weeks, and I've drunk enough to, like, sink a village, and, you know, I don't feel good. If you don't feel good, stop it. You know, but you've got to consciously make these decisions that help you.
It's that
be
self-discipline
healthier.
to do it.
Totally, exactly. And self-discipline's hard.
Yeah.
You know, really hard. Stupidly hard. Especially when your job and 80% of your life is geared around drinking. You know, like, it's hard to not do it. You know, sometimes when I've been trying to not drink, and, you know, you walk into a bar and all of a sudden someone just pours you a shot and it's in front of you, and, oh, well, you just do it. Like, it's just almost second nature. But I think, having those conscious things of going, okay, well, rather than going to that booze tasting where I'm just going to drink 15 whiskies, I'm going to go and play a round of golf, or I'm going to go for a walk along the river, or I'm going to read a book, or, you know, little things like that. Like, I think just a consciousness, and, like, I'm not saying don't drink. Like, I'm just saying be conscious of what you're doing, you know? Like,
not in excess.
Yeah, that comes for everything. Like, you know, especially with drugs as well. It's a huge one, especially in our hospitality culture. You know, drugs have always been a huge thing, and just you know, looking after yourself and making those conscious decisions, and kind of being aware of, you know, how your body's feeling, like listening to your body rather than telling it to work 80 hours a week and spend your one day off hitting bag and, you know, 15 shots of Jameson or whatever, you know, like, not that I do that much.
Just to be responsible.
Just to be
Yeah,
responsible.
man. I've got one last question for you today, Pez.
Yeah.
What's coming up next for you?
Oh, that's a good question. A few different things. 15 shots of Jamison in a bag. No, just kidding. No, look, I am in the process of applying to begin my winemaker's degree.
Yep.
So I'll find out about that in a couple of weeks, and that would be study starting next year.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's on kind of a personal thing. It's something that I want to kind of have, not on the back burner, but something that I just keep kind of ticking away over the next couple of years. And I'd really love to make wine, so I feel like that's probably a step in the right direction. So that's on a personal note. That's something that I'm really looking forward to. And something that you're interested in, like studying something that you're interested in isn't really study at all, you know, like
Yeah,
if you're
totally.
enjoying what you're doing and it's giving you a greater appreciation for a passion and it's giving you a greater understanding of something that we sell day in, day out, then, you know, I'm really looking forward to that experience. I'll be helping open another venue in the next couple of months, which will be really cool, which is...
Under wraps.
Under wraps at this point.
Keeping that
in
to
time.
yourself there?
Yeah. But that's coming up, so quite a large venue, which should be a lot of fun. And then look, in the kind of short term, I'd really like to kind of open something small myself.
Cool, man.
That's kind of like a 3-year plan. So
Awesome.
that's kind of on the horizon as well. So yeah, it's all a few little things here and there, but
That's very
nothing
exciting.
really distinct, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Pleasure, mate. Anytime.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Enjoy the episode? Like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram to stay in the loop at Hospopreneurs. Want to be a part of the show or know a hospopreneur? Send us an email, hospopreneurs@gmail.com. Interviewing creative and innovative minds in hospitality. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.